I'm part of the generation who grew up with television, and I spent lots of time watching Mutual of Omaha programs about people who'd capture elephants and lions. I was fascinated by their work. People who would buzz around in helicopters counting things and monitoring territories. When I was young, it was my dream to do that, but I never thought that one day that would be me sitting there studying the wildlife. I come from the city of St. Bruno de Montarville on the South Bank, but I was perhaps one of the lucky ones because during my childhood, every weekend, my grandparents would take me up to Mont Orford or Lake Eastman. We'd explore the wetlands. We'd watch the ducks. We didn't really understand, but we lived through that wildlife.
Denis Masse quenches his thirst to understand nature by immersing himself in the ambient noise of a forest where several species of animals coexist. More concerned with ecology than animal life, Denis devotes his life to various research projects related to preserving wildlife habitat and protecting animal species. The forests and lakes of Mauricie National Park are like a vast laboratory to him, his playground.
It's a park that is 93% forest, so everywhere around us is woodland. There are lakes and forest. In fact, there are 75 lakes of varying sizes, so to visit La Mauricie Park, we need to take our canoe and carry it from one lake to another over long distances.
Curious by nature, Denis Masse loves learning about the animals around him. Deer, loons, moose, wolves, and black bears are part of his world. Some of these studies can stretch over several years, for example, the one on bears.
The aim of the study was to determine where the bears spent the summer. Was it in the park, or did they leave in search of berries? And did they all return in autumn to winter in the park? And these were among the research objectives. And we captured around 75 different bears, which itself was a surprise, as it was more than we predicted. In February, we'd visit each female that was fitted with a radio collar, and we'd put them to sleep, take them out of their lairs, and check their rate of reproduction. And we went back the second year to find out how many of the babies we'd handled in the lairs had survived another year. A bear needs a lot of food reserves to reproduce and to care for the young bear cubs who spend 6 months in the lair without moving.
Continuing his observations, Denis Masse finds that a protected area doesn't necessarily guarantee the survival of the species he studies, as the animals simply move outside the park boundaries. In the same way, humans visit various wildlife habitats, which may affect some of the more fragile species like the loon.
The population of loons is fragile. There are already signs that the population isn't in good health and is affected by human disturbance.
The initial results of the inventories are astonishing. It seems that the loons' numbers are plummeting. Yet in days gone by, they were plentiful in La Mauricie.
I was amazed by this because already the first year on the big Lake Wapisagong and Lake Edouard, the loons weren't reproducing. And then the next year we continued our work and we noticed that these problems weren't just contained to Lake Wapisagong and Lake Edouard, which are big lakes. There were signs of disturbance on other lakes that were popular with the general public.
Other reasons could explain the disappearance of the loons on certain lakes. Further research led Denis to admit, with astonishment, that despite the distances involved, industrial pollution can be added to the threats facing species living in the park.
The loon is a bird that eats a lot of fish. Research has shown that in acidic lakes, loons have a hard time of eating regularly, and even if the birds didn't die, they were losing their young because the adults often couldn't bring back enough food for the young, so reproductive success was lower. There's also the problem of mercury, because we've discovered that loons are very affected by the mercury that falls from the atmosphere, mercury that collects in lakes and in fish.
During his ecological survey, Denis discovered that the main cause of the loon's decline is based in the history of the territory. A 100 years ago, great changes took place in the forests, changes which are still affecting the aquatic and riparian ecosystems. Yet the forest landscapes in Mauricie National Park can only be described as magnificent. What has happened? Have other animal species been affected? Is it too late to rectify the situation? To get an answer, Denis Masse asks dozens of questions. The challenge facing Denis Masse is to explore the territory, get to know and better understand the bonds between the animal species and their habitats. Throughout his exploration, he finds that the forests and lakes of Mauricie Park are not in as good health as you might think. With a team of partners, Denis goes in search of a rare species that was plentiful in the park just a few years ago. Whatever happened to the population of wood turtles?
I began to take an interest in this species. Where could we find them? What had really happened? And people told me that when the park started, there were lots in the south of Lake Wapizagong, visible on the sandy beaches, but that now they were no longer to be seen.
Having been up and down the territory, Denis finally found the clue. Thanks to Shirley Smith, a resident of the Shawinigan River sector, he discovered one of the largest nesting sites in Canada for this species.
In 1961, they'd see the turtles because there was a path that led down to the river, and along the way, there were turtles that came here to spawn. But no one paid attention to that. It was commonplace until I came to stay here in 1991. I'd go for an evening walk, and here I saw a dozen turtles looking to lay their eggs here.
It was a bit of a surprise because I finally realized that the population of wood turtles lived completely outside the park. I went back a second year to see at the time of year that the turtles lay, which is June. It was important to quantify this site because it is an endangered species. In 1996, it was a population that was in good shape. We're talking maybe 300 or 400 different individuals of a population that was still unaffected by human disturbance and by recreational activities, because this is still very wild territory.
Quebec has 9 species of turtle. 8 of them live mainly in the fresh water in the south of the province. As cold-blooded animals, they adapt their body rhythm to the ambient temperature. At the end of winter, Sunbathing is of vital importance as it accelerates their metabolism and assists in the formation of eggs. Turtles are aquatic animals. The wood turtle, as the name suggests, is the most terrestrial. The location of the nesting site will allow Denis Masse to shed light on the secrets of this legendary species in the park. What is the real condition of this population? Why did they leave?
I see her. Here she is. In 96, 97, we initiated research work with the students from McGill University and the University of Quebec at Trois-Rivières. And at that time, I had an important partner, Mr. Jean-Claude Bourgeois, who works for the Wildlife and Parks Company. He teamed up with me to do everything possible to protect this population.
I should say that the wood turtle is an endangered species, both in Quebec and in the whole of Canada, and almost everywhere throughout its range, populations are declining. The first stages are always the same, whatever the object. You first assess the population, count the individuals, check the individual's age, as that's often a clue to the population's health. Then we monitor the spawning site, the hatching of the young, the population's productivity. We also carried out work to understand what habitat they use and what is the extent of the space they occupy annually. These individuals reproduce at a very advanced age, 12, 13, 14 years old, even as old as 18. That's the age of sexual maturity, the age when females lay eggs. Another characteristic element is the survival rate of the young. It's very low, around 1%. That means one young turtle in 100 will hatch, enter the population, and 14 to 18 years later will become an individual who participates in reproduction.
In addition to their delayed sexual maturity, the young wood turtles are very vulnerable to predators during the hatching season at the nesting site. When they venture off to the river, the young turtles are easy prey for predators such as raccoons, skunks, and great blue herons.
Here we have a nest of wood turtles that we didn't protect with fences. You can clearly see that the eggs have been dug up by a raccoon or a skunk. To us, that's a surprise, because here the density of raccoons used to be low. There wasn't that big a population. There's no hatching hole here, nothing.
No.
No.
Here neither.
The protective measures taken to counter predation and human disturbance at the nesting site seem to benefit the young wood turtles. But it will probably take several years before Denis can know the real impact of these measures. His immediate task is to find the reason for their disappearance from the park. Where does the problem lie? How to entice them to return? For now, these questions remain unanswered. Day after day, Denis Masse crosses the vast expanses of forest in Mauricie Park. He knows the animal species that live here. He knows that several are in trouble, and he'd like to find solutions to their problems. He and his colleagues are seeking the causes of the declining loon population and the disappearance of the wood turtle. Finally, they find a clue.
The park's forest has been cut back 3 times up until 1970, the time the park was created. Everything was cut back, disturbed by man. There were logging roads everywhere. All the lakes were used by man for moving lumber, for log driving.
Virtually all the large bodies of water, and even the smaller bodies of water, all the waterways, the routes that could be used, were laid out, and all the banks more or less eroded. The vegetation was killed by the increase in the water level, and it all fell to the bottom of the lakes. So there was a major modification of habitat, which can also have a very great influence on the residents and the wildlife.
Since then, the forest has regained its lost territory, but past industrial activities are still putting several species at risk today. Can the lost habitats be restored?
We don't think in terms of returning to what it was originally, because the ecosystems have evolved. To be clear, it's important to understand that we're just trying to stabilize the situation. For example, by restoring the water levels, preventing shoreline erosion, allowing riparian vegetation. In other words, plant life outside the body of water to build up again. These are zones of great biodiversity, but when they disappear completely, when the habitat is absent, so are the species.
That's the wood we pulled out of Lac Français or Lac Isaïe. We pulled out 10,000 logs like that. When you restore a lake, you take out the wood that accumulates at the bottom of the lake, and that's an enormous quantity. The work that we do on aquatic habitats, which is done by Michel Plante, is beneficial in improving the ecological state of the park. The work he does to clear the bottom of the lake of logs and restore the water levels by dismantling the old dams will benefit the endangered species, especially the wood turtle, which uses the riparian zones. And also possibly the loons, because they nest on the islands, and if the water levels are stable, it benefits its reproduction. It's easier for the species to reproduce. Given the conservation objectives of the park, we have implemented measures to protect the population, that is, to alleviate the problems that visitor frequentation causes for loon reproduction. From the first year, all the islands in the park were protected, so people couldn't stop on the islands. We have also replanted alders and bushes on the beaches so that people can't stop on the islands for bathing. And we've accompanied that with signs. On Lake Wapasagong since 1998, the loon has returned to nest. Now we have 4 nesting pairs on the lake, whereas before we had none. So that's good news. It may be that people's behavior has changed from our protection of the islands and the information campaign, so we can conclude that the measures we've taken are right. I've found her, Marie-Pierre. We can replace her transmitter here.
To help the population of wood turtles reclaim the territory, a reintroduction program has been set up on some bodies of water where they used to be. But the success of this measure can only be properly evaluated in 20 years' time.
Since we began work on the wood turtle outside the park, we've continued our work and found 2 or 3 nesting sites on the shores of Lake Wapesagong in places where historically the wood turtle used to reproduce. So these are all positive signs that the wood turtle is making a comeback in La Mauricie National Park. It's true that the more beautiful a park is, the more it is popular, and often the more accessible it is, the more people there are. It's my job to do research work on the wildlife and make recommendations that are achievable, showing, for example, that we can protect as well as allowing people to come and enjoy the park. This is an incredible opportunity to do this work because not everybody can do this kind of research. I often tell the people I know that I probably have the best job in all of Canada because I can study the animals that everybody wants to know, to gain knowledge by capturing them in their lair, in a trap, by handling them, by having close contact with the animal. I've spent a big part of my career in a national park trying to protect the wildlife. To me, it's a laboratory, and I'm still learning more and more every day.